Good evening, everybody. On behalf of MSN Labs Private Limited, myself, Nitin Kumar Chaturvedi, National Sales Manager for our Cardiopulmonary Division, welcome all our master faculties and guests for the today's scientific session on the management of pulmonary hypertension and COVID-19 patient. Before we proceed for further proceedings, just I would like to have some time of your eminent guests, sir, for just giving some brief about our organization as a whole. Innovation resonates a sense of purpose in the evolution and existence of human life. The creative capacity of a human mind has always been the source of inspiration. We believe every life matters and everyone deserves quality medicine. Apart from the efficacy, affordability, and accessibility, we want to be the first to touch and impact human lives. So we at MSN research for the better medicine. The quest for innovation drives us to serve better and better for today and tomorrow. We have one of the Asia's largest integrated pharmaceutical API and formulation facilities and the R&D facilities, which we have got at the Hyderabad. And please meet the Global Indian Pharmaceutical Company, which has got the turnover crossing $600 million, presence in 65 countries globally and 8 offices worldwide, including US and UK, 11,000 workforce globally, won the trust of more than 4 crore customers across 65 countries, an integrated state-of-art R&D center and 14 manufacturing facilities in India and USA. What we have done till now, just to share with you, that we have got 250 products in pipeline, 600 patents globally, 715 world's largest DMFs in US, and 45 dossiers submitted in other major markets. And what in the US market we are doing, that is 100 plus ANDAs submitted in US market, 25 products approval in the US and 20 plus products available in the tentative approvals in US, and 70 products commercialized in the US market. So we have done many first time in India product launches in the Indian market. As you can see, in the 2013 we have came with the Prasugrel, Febuxostat, Tapentadol, Tolvaptan, Prasusafe, that is our brand name. Then in 2015 we came with the Bosentan, Dexlansoprazole, Roflumilast, Vilazodone. In 2016, we came with the Lurasidone. In 2017, we came with Ambrisentan, Amlodipine, Sildosin, Azilsartan, Mirabegron, Macitentan, and Riosigod. And in 2013-20, we have came with the Triantine. And now in 2021, we have came with the Dapavan and Tofadose, these two products. And what we have done in the PH market, just to share with all of you, that first we came with the Bosentan, that with the brand name of Safe Bo. Then we came with PD5 inhibitors like Tadovas, and we came with Pulmonex, that is Ambrisentan. Then we came in 2013 with the right dose of Sildenafil PS20. And in 2017, we came with the Pulmonex kit, that is a combination therapy of Ambrisentan and Tadalafil. And we also came with the Macitentan and Riosigod in this PS therapy. So we have got a full PH basket. So MSN expertise of research to innovate brought first-time India launches to support super specialists in bringing down Indian patient sufferings, who to better stand by you, a company with a global research, global manufacturing, and global quality. Company which has acquired trust globally. We at MSN on a journey to serve you better and better. To partner in creating awareness in management of pulmonary hypertension in COVID-19 patient, approach for emerging treatment option, increasing the patient life expectancy of quality of life. We would like to start the today's session, and I would like to invite our moderator for the today's session, who is an eminent personality in the field of cardiology. I don't feel that his name has to be shared all across in the Indian perspective in the cardiology field. Dr. H.N. Misra is an ex-professor and HOD in the PG Department of Cardiology in SCB Medical College and Hospital in Cuttack. And presently, he is working as a senior consultant in cardiologist in Apollo Hospital, Bhubaneswar in Odisha. And Dr. H.N. Misra is having total 34 years of experience as a cardiologist. He is the ex-president of Indian College of Cardiology, ex-president of Cardiology Society of India, that is Orissa chapter. He published more than 40 scientific papers in various national journals. So I would like to hand over the session to Professor H.N. Misra, sir. Please, sir. Dr. Misra, sir?
So please unmute your mic.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sir. Yeah, sir. We can hear you.
So at the outset, I must welcome all the speakers, the panelists, and the delegates who are participating in this symposium. And I must thank MSN for hosting this type of webinar, which is first of its kind in the country. Because in the last 1 year plus, we have been doing webinars on COVID on various aspects. Nobody has ever touched COVID in PH in the COVID scenario. This is first, to my knowledge, this is the first of its kind. So we have just to set the context going, all of us know that pulmonary artery hypertension is a disease with high morbidity and mortality. And in COVID era, we lack much of data about the management of COVID in PH patients or the COVID patients who recover from the illness, the post-COVID or the long COVID syndrome. What is the chance of them getting pulmonary hypertension in the future? Because one of the proposition is that there will be in situ thrombosis or thromboembolism in post-COVID situations. So these are the two important issues, and in USA there are 77 PH care centers wherein they have found that there are two concepts. One is whether the patients suffering from PH, they have a high morbidity and mortality when they suffer from COVID, and how do you take care of them? Second, there is a group of people who think that PH patients, when they suffer from COVID, they probably, because of the PH specific therapy or because of the disease per se, it's poorly understood, they have less complications from COVID. So I think our speakers, eminent speakers, will be addressing these issues with the few words without wasting time. I will be calling upon the first speaker, Dr. Indra. Dr. Indra Kuladipati, we had a session together couple of maybe 10-15 days ago where he was a speaker and I was a moderator. Dr. A.K. Kaur was the chairperson. Dr. Indra Kuladipati started his career in the field of cardiology in 2012. He joined as a senior consultant cardiologist in Downtown Hospital, Guwahati. Now he is working as a senior consultant interventional cardiologist in Downtown Guwahati. He will be speaking. Dr. Indra is having special interest in preventive cardiology, in evaluation in the management of acute MI, transradial intervention, complex angioplasty, heart failure and arrhythmia. Is well experienced in cardiac devices like AICD and CRT. From last 17 years, he has performed approximately 6,500 coronary angiography and angioplasty, both elective and emergency, complex angioplasty, total occlusion, triple vessel disease, left main. He is an expert in performing catheter-based cardiac intervention, which is more safe and patient-friendly compared to the traditional method through femoral approach. So with these words, I think Dr. Indra Kuladipati is known to most of the audience. I'll request him to speak on the topic that he is supposed to speak is on pulmonary hypertension and COVID-19 infection. Dr. Indra, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sir, for the introduction and MS.
Yes, sir.
Madam, Navanita Sasikumar. Dr. Navanita Sasikumar completed her MD in Pediatrics from Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal, and DM Cardiology from LTMGH, Sion, Mumbai. She is now working in Hayat Hospital and Downtown Hospital, Guwahati. She has done a year-long hands-on training on catheter intervention for sick children in Toronto General Hospital under the University of Toronto, Canada. She has a good experience in Dr. K.M. Cherian's unit at Cherian, I think in Chennai. She initiated and ran a teaching program in pediatric intervention in public sector hospitals in India, government hospital at Kottayam, Kerala. She has authored numerous reputed research papers, journals. She serves as an expert in National Health Mission program and activities in Kerala and Meghalaya. She will be speaking on a very interesting topic, pulmonary hypertension and COVID in children, because this is an important issue. So far in our first and second wave, we have less children suffering from COVID, but as it is as expected, if the third wave comes, if at all it comes, then it is said that more and more children will be affected. So in this context, this is very important. We'll hear Dr. Navanita how she goes to manage the pH in children with COVID. Share your slides, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah. Going ahead. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction. And in the next 15 minutes, I will be talking about pulmonary artery hypertension and COVID-19 in children specifically. Just an outline of the whole thing. We'll first have a quick look at COVID-19 in children so that we understand the background. Then what about pulmonary artery hypertension in children with COVID-19? And the other way around, what about children with pre-existing pulmonary artery hypertension who contract COVID-19? And then how do we manage these situations in the practical setting? So in the outset itself, I would like to mention that we have little data on the incidence of SARS-CoV-2 in children with pre-existing PH, and also on the incidence of PH occurring in conjunction with COVID-19. So there is not much data around, but we will try to interpret whatever we have in conjunction with the pathophysiology of pulmonary hypertension. So we all know that, we have an impression that children have been relatively spared from COVID-19 related illness, especially severe, and represents only a small percentage of the total caseload in many of the countries. I would suggest that we take these data with a pinch of salt, because there are a lot of issues which can contribute to, inaccuracy in these data, because children many a times are asymptomatic or they have less severe symptoms. Many of them are not tested, and, even children have less chance of PCR positivity. So, we have to take this data with a pinch of salt, although generally this has been the impression. And we also know that, children are probably less susceptible because they have cross immunity from other coronavirus infections, and their sinuses are not well developed, where exactly the viruses replicate. And the receptors that the virus needs to enter the cells, they are not well developed in kids, and kids have less comorbidity. So these are the features which probably leads to less infection in children. So if you look at what happens to, or how pulmonary hypertension can be associated with COVID-19, we know that the ACU2 receptors are, key in the mechanism whereby the virus actually enters the alveolar lung cells and the vascular endothelium, where these receptors are highly expressed. It also requires other proteinases to actually enter. In children, these proteinases are, supposed to be less the AC2 expression as well as the other proteinase required. So that is one of the reasons why, it is suspected that children are less susceptible. So what happens after the virus enters the cell? It leads to vascular injury, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction. There is local inflammation. Then we have systemic inflammation, which is systemic inflammatory response syndrome, or the cytokine storm, which can lead to hypercoagulability, pulmonary microangiopathy, microthrombi, microembolism, all of which can lead to pulmonary artery hypertension. Also, we know that parenchymal damage and hypoxia. Parenchymal damage can lead to hypoxia. Hypoxia can lead to vasoconstriction, and vasoconstriction can lead to pulmonary artery hypertension. That is another mechanism. And then whenever there is ventilation perfusion mismatch, intrapulmonary right to left shunting, whereby more of deoxygenated blood escapes into the systemic circulation, there is more hypoxia, and again hypoxia begets more vasoconstriction and pulmonary artery hypertension. In addition, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, DNA damage, all have been implicated in the development of pulmonary artery hypertension in COVID-19 infection. And we have to understand that endothelial dysfunction is the key to initiate the cascade of events. So we know that once there is pulmonary artery hypertension, it can lead to right ventricular dysfunction and right ventricular failure, which can negatively affect the prognosis of these COVID-19 patients. So approximately 15% of severely ill COVID-19 patients have been found to have pulmonary artery hypertension. This is slightly underestimated because we know that the routinely performed tests include like a CT. It is unlikely that all sick patients in the ICU get a transthoracic echocardiography. Even if they get an echocardiography, the difficulties in assessing the right ventricular systolic pressure or the pulmonary artery systolic pressure in the practical setting on a ventilated patient in the ICU. So these things, can contribute to likely underestimation of the incidence of PH. Not only that, it has also been noted that even in moderately ill patients on follow-up, like even a 2 months follow-up after COVID-19, a significant percentage had pulmonary arterial hypertension and even RV dysfunction. So, as we all have known by now, this disease, is evolving still, and there are a lot of things which we know. There might be a lot of things which might unfold. What happens to these patients on long-term follow-up? Does the PAH subside after a particular amount of time, or it worsens? Whether it can contribute to long-term pulmonary hypertension, we don't know. So all these things are unanswered at this point of time and need more studies. How about COVID-19? If we look at in children, we know that most of them are asymptomatic, still transmissible. Many of them have only mild disease. Even younger children have milder disease. And compared to adults, the difference is that the classic respiratory presentation is less common. And another important presentation in children is multisystem inflammatory syndrome, which is defined by laboratory evidence of inflammation and multi-system involvement, at least 2 organ system involvement with no alternative diagnosis and positive serology or RT-PCR or antigen test for COVID-19. So this is being specifically seen in children, and it sometimes occurs, a few weeks to sometimes a couple of months, usually up to 6 weeks after the first initial SARS-CoV-2 infection. And this sometimes can lead to very severe illness and death in children. But there is little data if you look on the incidence of pulmonary hypertension occurring in conjunction with multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children. But if you look at the pathophysiology of multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, what we see is a good number of these children have cardiac dysfunction, mild, moderate, or severe ventricular dysfunction. And we know that whenever there is left heart involvement, there could be pulmonary artery hypertension associated with left heart disease. So we know that, it might not be pulmonary arterial hypertension as you look at it from the IPAH point of view, but this is a different group of pulmonary hypertension, which is pulmonary hypertension from left heart disease. How about pre-existing pulmonary arterial hypertension and COVID-19? So a number of interactions between the pathophysiology, targeted pH therapies, and SARS-CoV-2 have been suggested. These are all speculations and hypotheses. None of them have been proved in clinical studies or, as to whether the pH patients are protected, whether they have higher risk. One thing that I would like to highlight is that, pulmonary arterial hypertension is a heterogeneous group of patients. They have a variety of underlying pathologies. And even I would say that a pinpoint diagnosis of why, the etiological diagnosis of pulmonary arterial hypertension depends on how much workup has been actually done. So existing data itself, I would say, will have to be interpreted carefully. So what are the mechanisms that could modify COVID-19 illness in patients with pulmonary hypertension? So we know that in pulmonary arterial hypertension patients, there are already a lot of changes which are happening in the lungs. So we know that the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is dysregulated, ACE2 is decreased, and so there is a possibility that there is decreased viral entry. So that is one of the things. But on the other hand, angiotensin 2 levels are high, which can cause worse lung injury and inflammation. If we look at the immune system in pulmonary arterial hypertension, we know that there are increased perivascular mast cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, T cells. So there are a lot of immune system changes which are already there in patients with pre-existing pulmonary arterial hypertension. So these can modulate a viral replication and even maybe the cytokine response to SARS-CoV-2. These are some of the mechanisms. And it has also been proposed that because there is already an existing pulmonary endothelial dysfunction, these patients might not be able to mount a florid response, a florid inflammatory response to SARS-CoV-2, which could protect them from severe illness. These are all hypotheses, none of them proved. The other one is that relative hypoxemia. See, the severest pulmonary arterial hypertension patients might have some amount of hypoxemia from right to left shunt. And, it is postulated that relative hypoxemia might have a negative effect on viral replication. Also, chronic hypoxemia is supposed to give some cytoprotective effects with increased nitric oxide, which might also protect against severe illness of COVID-19 illness in patients with PAH. These are all speculations. None of them are proved in studies. Other than that, even our targeted pH medications, they might have some protective effects in the setting of COVID-19, it is suspected. Like the endothelin receptor antagonists, they inhibit angiotensin 2, and they can inhibit angiotensin 2 induced vasoconstriction and lung injury. It has been supposed that inhaled nitric oxide has antimicrobial effects. And generally pH therapy is considered to be anti-inflammatory, anti-proliferative, and anti-thrombotic. So all these characteristics of pH therapy could actually prove beneficial in patients with COVID-19 illness. So these are the mechanisms that have been proposed. One thing that I would like to mention is that all the targeted pH therapies are pulmonary vasodilators, and they have the capacity to worsen ventilation perfusion mismatch in patients who have COVID-19 related parenchymal lung injury. So that we have to keep in mind. If you see COVID-19 with pH, reflexly you start pulmonary hypertension therapy. That might not be a great idea. So are pediatric PH patients at increased risk of getting infection? No. So that is not considered so. It is considered that their incidence is likely similar to the general population only, but they are considered to have more severe illness and higher rates of hospital admission. So in the study, which was not specifically pediatric patients, it was found that there is 50% hospitalization and 12% mortality in PH patients with pre-existing pulmonary arterial hypertension and chronic thromboembolic pulmonary arterial hypertension. So they definitely are at higher risk, and it's a conceivable thing. Any of us can understand that patients with already compromised cardiovascular system, many of them have compromised, are at the brim of reduced cardiac output, or some of them already have reduced cardiac output. So when there is this pressure from COVID-19 on the hemodynamics to increase heart rate, to increase cardiac output, due to the systemic inflammatory response, due to hypertension, due to hypoxia, those who are already compromised might not be able to mount a response and could succumb easily to COVID-19. So how has been the community responding, the parents, the community taking care of PH patients, especially children? So, this is a study from Poland where, they did a survey of parents of pediatric patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension. And naturally, everybody is scared, and, our lives have been changed significantly by this pandemic. And it is perceivable, it's conceivable that the parents of children who are, sick, really very sick, like pulmonary hypertension or congenital heart disease, they will be more worried. And indeed, the surveys showed that many parents were concerned that, they can cause COVID-19 will cause complications in their child, including death. And the other point is that many of them, up to 2/3, they were concerned in visiting healthcare institutions. We know that, the routine patients hesitate to come in, and to a certain extent, it is good. But when in this study, it was found that even when there is a deterioration, when there is a clinical deterioration in the pulmonary arterial hypertension related symptoms, still they were hesitant to actually get a medical help, because they were afraid that the child will contract COVID-19 and develop complications and die. So this has been the effect on the caretakers. So now, what are the clinical settings which we might have to deal with? So one is, how do we follow up established PAH patients? Two, if there is a newly diagnosed PH patients, how do we handle them in the setting of COVID-19? And then three, triage and management of established PH patients suffering from COVID-19. So follow up of established patients, ideally, they should have all the routine investigations. But one of the practical things which has been adopted by most of the centers is e-visits or televisits. Follow-up is easily done through virtual visits. And of course, they have to continue all COVID-19 precautions as per guidelines. They have to continue their routine immunizations. And it has to be mentioned that, there is no need of change in pH-specific medications unless indicated for that particular patient for any reason. Newly diagnosed pulmonary hypertension, we are supposed to evaluate them the same way that we evaluate them when there was no COVID. The only thing is it is recommended that they undergo COVID-19 screening as well. So how about pulmonary hypertension patients who are SARS-CoV-2 positive? So they are recommended to be managed by a multidisciplinary team, of course, because they are very complicated and, they will need input from the cardiology team, the intensive care, pulmonology, everybody, so that, they can be treated well and, their prognosis is better. And it has to be kept in mind that, there should be a lower threshold for hospital admission and monitoring for these patients. And invasive hemodynamic monitoring is recommended in severely ill patients with SARS-CoV-2 infection. And it has to be kept in mind that any procedure which needs to be done on these patients, like central line, intubation, we have to take all precautions to avoid hemodynamic collapse, because we know that they are always at the risk of a compromised cardiac output, and any minor changes in heart rate can actually push them into hemodynamic collapse. And how about the pH-specific therapy in these children with COVID-19? So it is recommended that the pH-specific therapy is continued unless there is any particular reason, unless for some particular reason the team thinks that it might be better to withhold it, like for hemodynamic reasons or for ventilation reasons. And, sildenafil and bosentan, which are commonly used therapies, they have shown some beneficial effects where their anti-inflammatory actions, as we already discussed. Sildenafil and tadalafil both have some antithrombotic effects. But then, as we already mentioned, clinical benefits need carefully planned and executed large studies. So, the same way that COVID has affected care for all other diseases, it has had a significant impact on pulmonary hypertension care in children as well. And most of the centers have switched to routine virtual visits in the studies that have been published. And you also know that for practical purposes, we have been avoiding, especially we who deal with congenital heart disease patients, we have sort of kept most of the follow-ups, like, routine follow-ups by virtual visits or minimum necessary investigations type of thing. And the other thing is that pulmonary hypertension patients who used to get routine diagnostic procedures, like cardiac catheterization study to assess like what is happening to their hemodynamics, this is routine in PH centers, but they have been withholding it to prevent risk of transmission when they come to the hospital for these procedures. So essentially, the key points are in these patients: continue pulmonary hypertension specific therapy, monitor symptoms, and if there is change in symptom, then they definitely need hospital visit and assessment and change in medications or whatever needed. And they have to diligently follow preventive measures because they are at high risk of mortality and complications from COVID-19. So thank you for your valuable attention and questions.
Thank you, Dr. Navneeta, for your excellent coverage of PH in children. I think we'll take up the questions, and we have also panelists. We have another Dr. Devasri, pediatric interventional cardiologist. We'll ask her opinion at the end of the second speaker. I think I invite Dr. Indra. Dr. Indra, are you ready?
Yes,
Indra Pradipati?
Yes, I'm ready. Yeah.
You please start. After your talk is over, we'll take up the questions and comments from the panelists.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And thank you, MSN, for invitation. I'll switch off my video because of my technical problem. So, pulmonary hypertension and COVID-19 is not commonly discussed, as Mr. Sir has already said. There may be two contexts. One patient have pulmonary hypertension, maybe already diagnosed or maybe recently diagnosed. Now they have COVID-19. That I think that is whole true for any chronic disease like cardiac disease or hypertension. But more common, I think more importantly and maybe more interesting will be like if somebody have COVID-19, maybe mild, moderate and severe, the chances of developing pulmonary hypertension in long run. And like whether we know that some patients may develop ILD, some patients may do recover, and probably some patients may develop. Even we do not have any prospective study, but probably many things more of anecdotal and personal experiences. And so that's here the input from the Mr. Sir, the panelists, and even the delegates will be important in terms of things, because in India we have so much of cases, and certainly the quality healthcare is not available everywhere when healthcare have been overall with the number of COVID cases. So by definition, pulmonary hypertension, we know that when we call pulmonary hypertension, it's mostly arterial hypertension, unless specifically mentioned venous hypertension. And you can see that the main pathophysiology at the level of small pulmonary arteries, where it is a histology classification which actually correlates with severity. Traditionally, the histology classifications of vasoconstrictions, medial hypertrophy, cell proliferation and fibrosis, complex lesion and thrombosis in situ. And you can see that therapy that been directed to PH is actually to reverse these processes by different medicines, including prostacyclin. Definition, we know that when patient have mean pulmonary artery pressure more than 25 or plus with normal pulmonary filling pressures, where that means pulmonary capillary waste pressure is less than 15 and the vascular resistance is more than 3 unit. And many of our patients, we can see that in cardiology that they have mixed vasculopathy. That means they may have elements of vascular as well as arterial hypertension. So obviously in absence of pulmonary parenchymal and thromboembolic disease, when the classification will be different. So in terms of pH, we know that obviously is many times not diagnosed, is not so easy to diagnose like systemic hypertension when you can diagnose by an BP apparatus, where many times mostly you have to diagnose by echocardiography and there's a clinical clue. So it's many times the cases are not been evaluated or missed. It can affect both male and female. And we know that it's not a benign disease. Even sometimes as a clinician we think it's a benign disease, it's not a benign disease. And many times you can see on the diagnosis, if the functional class is high, class 3, class 4, the prognosis is not good. And you can see that 2.8 year from median diagnosis, 3 years survival is only 48% if untreated. And we have new medicines where if given in right combinations, it can help to reduce complications. And we had a classification, pulmonary arterial hypertension is idiopathic and other causes. Pulmonary hypertension due to left side is more commonly you can see because of valvular heart disease, systolic dysfunction, diastolic dysfunction, where management is entirely different. And pulmonary hypertension due to lung disease, which maybe I think one common patterns if somebody have COVID lung infections or lung damage, chronic damage. Another cause like thromboembolic, where management is different. Many times we have to do intervention or surgery and others. So COVID-19, we know that these numbers may not be true now. We have every day we have so many numbers. In India, we have more than 200 of these. Many of us actually have COVID conditions like heart failure, CKD, diabetes, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and PH also, which may be actually underdiagnosed when they have COVID-19 infections, when many times focus may be mostly on the management of COVID-19. So we know that primarily it affects respiratory systems, but by now we know that it can affect any of the organs. We have seen commonly that personally have seen that patient after having an predominant cardiac involvement, post-recovery they have arrhythmia or ACS-like presentations and rarely myocarditis. So it can affect any systems. And respiratory systems, once they have moderate to severe involvement, we know that ARDS is the commoner form. But in CT scans, there is a pattern that many patients may have predominantly parenchymal involvement, but some patients do develop the predominantly vascular involvement, where patients may have thromboembolic disease. And probably more interesting will be when some of these patients, whether they develop pulmonary hypertension in the long run, that we need prospective study. At this point, the further discussions will be mostly of anecdotals, mostly basis of logic and pathophysiology, but actually do not know whether it will be, how far it will go, do not know. And certainly the management as well as the very alert in terms of management will be very important. So without COVID virus, this novel virus infect have predominantly they have affect the pulmonary parenchyma. Some of the individuals may have changes where they may be susceptible to PH in futures, which has to be prospectively studied. So can they develop PH? Certainly, why not? But then we do not have prospective studies. It's more of anecdotals as well as personal experiences and epidemiological studies. But I think, but like in other cardiac disease, we know that once they have COVID-19, the other form of cardiac illness like acute coronary syndromes or myocardial infarction, heart failure, they are not coming to hospitals. So maybe the less number of cases of PH in COVID-19, maybe that they are not coming to hospitals, so they may not be diagnosed. But probably if these things are not being treated, then probably in future the number may be high. So as speculated, like any of the chronic disease, in COVID-19, it may not be actually fact personally, but then we do not know whether these patients are not being diagnosed or they are not coming to hospitals. But the possibility again is not sure that whether this PH or is therapy that is given for pulmonary hypertension, whether they protect or does not protect, we do not know at present certainly with certainty. But as like in other cardiac patients, the centers who are treating pulmonary hypertension, they have seen a less number of cases, whether because of they are not coming to hospitals or they are dying before coming to hospitals, or they are not being diagnosed, we do not know. In terms of possible hypotheses why that pulmonary hypertension, if they are treated at least, then they may have some protective effect. So one is that reduced viral entrance, because in pulmonary hypertension they have, because the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 is the receptors for viral entry in the lung parenchyma. In pulmonary hypertension, the less expression of ACE2 receptors. So by that, then virus may have less access to the pulmonary parenchyma. Attenuated lung damage because of because of adaptive changes, because of chronic inflammations. And more logically, if they are well treated by medicines which are otherwise recommended for pulmonary hypertension, especially endothelin receptors antagonists and prostacyclins, they may be helpful or protective. So one protective is again hypothesis, not being prospectively proven beyond doubt. But one is a reduced viral entrance. We know that COVID-19 virus, they gain entry to ACE2 receptors, which had some confusions regarding the use of ARB or ACE inhibitors in hypertension. By this, now we know that it is only ACE2 specific, not ACE1. And in pulmonary hypertension, ACE2 receptors are downregulated, less numbers of receptors are present. So probably viral may gain less entry compared to non-hypertension patients. Again, I think here individual vulnerability will be important, and like in other patients like smoker paradox, it may be some paradox, maybe in future patients may be discovered when PS patient may have late entry. Chronic inflammation, because there are already inflammatory cells are present in the endothelium or in the pulmonary hypertension milieu, so they may partly protect or partially protect from viral damage. Second is attenuated lung damage because of hypoperfusions and adaptive changes. They may be more protected once they have viral infections, viral inflammations. Cytokine damage may be less because they have already inflammatory cells present, which are partly protecting. And more logically, as I said, it may be the protective effect of especially endothelin receptor antagonists. We know that in cytokine storm, these are all vasoconstrictive substances. So therapies which are used to increase nitric oxide level through receptor antagonists, ETA receptor antagonists, they may help to reduce lung damage. And on that logic, I think there are trials going on where ACE inhibitors or ARB and other molecules have been tried to reduce lung damage once person have an ARDS or COVID-19 pulmonary involvement, although we do not have any randomized prospective well-controlled trial to say that this therapy are helpful or not helpful. So in terms of critically ill patients, we know that ultimately clinical conditions will decide how to treat the patients. And many patients are fortunately mild or moderate, asymptomatic. But if they have a severe or moderate infections, if they are non-critically ill, obviously they have to manage, and if they're critically ill, is very difficult. So if they're sick patients, they will be hospitals, ideally in ICU, with a non-invasive trial of non-invasive ventilations with negative pressure rooms or high flow oxygens, ventilations to be avoided as far as possible. And there are FDA recommendation is that facilities for inhaled nitric oxides or pulse epoprostanols is available, will help in patients who have pulmonary hypertension with COVID-19 severe infections. And so once respiratory failure progresses, a difficult scenario. And again, we know that in pulmonary hypertension, most of the complications do develop once they have surgery or need for mechanical ventilations. And if they require mechanical ventilations, then we have to be very careful about the hemodynamic. In terms of people, they are very more prone to hypertensions, refractory hypertensions because of RV dysfunction or also RV contractility. So if you're giving any sedations, etomitor is preferred. Again, the analgesics and opiates has to be carefully used in patients who have pulmonary hypertension, and higher the severity, then higher will be the side effect with these drugs. So if they are already on treatment for pulmonary hypertension, then those has to be modified. Practically, many of our patients in India, they are getting either oral drug because the combinations of phosphodiesterase inhibitors and endothelin receptor antagonists commonly are used. So this medicine has to be continued, and if the patient is not able to take orally, then obviously these medicines can be crushed. Oral tablet can be crushed and given by nasogastric tube. If the patients are on all prostacyclins or other guanine cyclase activators, which are not so, I think, commonly in most of the Indian patients, then the inhalation, the dose or the route can be modified. Route of the medicine can be modified. We know that they are intravenous forms, subcutaneous forms, as well as oral forms. So inhaled epoprostenol or iloprost can be used as a substitute for inhalations and those who are on Celexipac can be briefly transitions to IV Celexipacs. Again, this may not be the real life scenario in most of our patients. Many of our patients are actually getting oral drug. So this drug either has to be given orally, and if not able to take orally, then that can be given by an Ryle's tube. So management, we know that COVID-19, many medicines are used and linked to the prevention of secondary infections, respiratory care, use of ECMO. But in terms of pulmonary hypertension, there are drugs that have been trialed in individual cases, anecdotal cases. Drugs like sildenafil, ambrisentan, iloprost, which are otherwise recommended, has been tested. Nitric oxide have been recommended as an inhaled nitric oxide or as pulse nitric oxides, and other medicines like ACE inhibitors, ARB, on the note of reducing, with the hope of reducing lung inflammations, and drugs like tocilizumab and all remdesivir have been tested. So we do not have any clear answer so far, but like any chronic disease, who have heart failure, who have myocardial disease, or any chronic disease, the therapy which are otherwise recommended for the primary disease like pulmonary hypertension should be continued, and depending on the clinical or scenario or hemodynamics, probably have to adjust the dose, or we can change the route of therapy. Non-critically ill hospitalized patients, again, the CT scan is one of the things which will tell the severity and as well as the prognosis. ECG is a very useful tool in terms of pulmonary effect. We have a very good publication recently where ECG give a clue about the risks. So especially the presence of RV strain, classical S1QT tissue patterns tell prognosis. If there's signs of RV strain in ECG, then this is one of the marker of severity or bad prognosis. So ECG is very useful because it's available everywhere. And any signs which are suggestive of pulmonary embolism, pulmonary thromboembolism, so RV strain are certainly tell us bad prognosis, also like troponin and other markers of myocardial strain. So in terms of continuation of therapy like phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitors, soluble guanine cyclase stimulators now available, and endothelin receptor antagonist, this should be continued. And most of the drugs that are used in COVID-19, they do not have any significant drug interactions with these drugs which are available. And obviously oral prostacyclin and other inhalation prostacyclin or IV prostacyclin should be continued if there is no contraindications. So inhaled nitric oxides have been recommended by FDA to reduce lung injury in patients who have pulmonary hypertension as well as COVID-19 moderate to severe cases. And in low risk cases, the oral drugs should be continued. So like most of the patients, I think prevention is the key things for us. So obviously to prevent, we have to follow all guidelines, including the guideline that is set by regulatory authority, governments, wearing a mask, social distancing, frequent hand washings, because even the vaccination is not 100% protective, you know, and the chances of reinfection is not zero. So that has to be always the most important. So the last slide, I think COVID-19, I think so many things we're learning. Many maybe by on the time evolves, we'll know better in terms of development of pulmonary hypertension or other chronic ailments like arrhythmia or myocardial fibrosis, dyslipidemia, so many things. There are many speculations, but logically, because they have lung involvement, they can injure the endothelium. Many patients may develop pulmonary hypertension. And because pulmonary hypertensions are not diagnosed easily, unlike systemic hypertensions, in real life is only the echocardiography after the clinical evaluations will give a certain diagnosis. You have to be very careful. The patients have a COVID-19 infection, lung involvement, if they develop or does not develop on pulmonary hypertension should be looked into futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Indra Kuladipati, for your extent and lengthy talk on COVID and pH. I think now we have two panelists. Indra, can you answer your slides?
Yes, sir, I have answered.
So we have two panelists, Dr. Devasri Gangopadhyay, who is working as a consultant interventional pediatric cardiologist in Narayan Health, Rabindranath Tagore International Institute of Cardiac Sciences, Kolkata, and Dr. Ayan Kaur, who is a consultant interventional cardiologist in Narayan Health Rabindranath Tagore International Institute of Cardiac Sciences, Kolkata. So we'll also involve the panelists, and we have a lot of questions coming in now. As we go ahead, I'll just ask Dr. Devasri. You have heard Dr. Navanita about the pediatric pulmonary hypertension. Other than the patients, pediatric age group, other than the congenital heart disease, left-right shunt, which have developed Eisenmenger, other than these kind of patients, how often you see pulmonary arterial hypertension in pediatric age group? Dr. Devasri, and what is your take on these patients when they get infected with COVID?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I would, at the outset, I would like to congratulate the MSN team for organizing such a unique webinar, and also excellent presentations by Dr. Navneeta and Dr. Indra. We really received a lot of knowledge infusion today. And so with that, I will start to answer your question, sir. So honestly, if I have to answer your question, I do see a lot of patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension secondary to Eisenmenger syndrome, but not so much as idiopathic or heritable pulmonary arterial hypertension. I have one patient who is a 14-year-old girl whom I'm seeing for last 1 year. And that girl has got what we have called her, labeled her as idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, because we haven't been able to find out the cause after extensive evaluation. So her CT scan suggests some sort of interstitial lung disease. And so to my surprise, I have seen that her pulmonary hypertension waxes and wanes. At some point, sometimes she'll come very breathless, and at that time we'll find a very severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, where at another time she'll be doing well, and we'll find her to be having some less than moderate, so about mild to moderate hypertension. So that's very interesting. After extensive workup, we have found that she is some autoantibodies positive. So we are kind of just doing some autoimmune workup, and for the time being, we have put her on hydroxychloroquine and on some inhalational steroid. With that, she is doing well. So that's you can say that's my only patient with idiopathic or not that separate from congenital heart.
Have you come across any patients in your, because we know that large number of COVID patients in Bengal. So have you seen in pediatric age group, how often in pediatric age group people are hospitalized with COVID-19 during the first and second surge, in your experience? Or you think it's less common as has been reported?
Yes, sir. So that is the thing. They are not so much sick in the viremic phase. So when they are having the acute COVID illness, but more I'm seeing them, they are getting admitted with the multiple systemic inflammatory syndrome. So that is more in my experience, not so much in the viremic phase. But I am yet to see a patient in the MISC group also who is having pulmonary arterial hypertension.
Right. See, because most of the things are conjectural, and there is one view, as has been told by Dr. Navneeta, that if somebody has a pre-existing PH, whether it is secondary to congenital heart disease or COPD, or if it is a idiopathic PH, they are less susceptible for complications because of the lack of ACE receptors, because of the PH-specific therapy which are beneficial, which protects their endothelium, whatever it may be, because nothing is very clearly understood. What is your take on that? They will be more vulnerable, or they are less susceptible to COVID?
Sir, the evidences are conflicting. So I also did some literature review, and it's the evidence is conflicting. So some authors would say that they are more susceptible because of few reasons, and somebody would say that they are less susceptible because they
right. So we are not very sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just to set the ball rolling, Dr. Ryan.
Yes, sir. I'm here. Good evening, sir.
In your practice in Kolkata, are you anyway related to Dr. Ashok Kar?
Yes, sir. I'm his elder son, sir.
Oh. You tell Dr. H.N. Misra was moderating this session. He's a close friend of mine for the long years.
Absolutely, will do, sir.
Okay, so whatever in your experience now that you are working in a corporate hospital, how often you have seen PH patients, adult PH patients even, getting admitted with COVID? Or post-COVID, any complications like pulmonary embolism or anything you have seen or anything?
So just thank you firstly for the very warm introduction, and thanks to the MSN team for bringing up such a interesting topic of discussion. So I also happen to run the PH clinic in the hospital, and we have follow-up of PH patients. So overall, I would suggest that of around 25 patients that we have under regular follow-up, we have general causes being idiopathic, unlike the congenital group, and of course a significant being chronic thromboembolic also. So largely most of these patients, I think of them till date, I have 3 reported patients who've had COVID, but they've largely had a very asymptomatic phase and mostly have recovered very well. So most of these patients have been on sildenafil as well as some form of either bosentan or macitentan, and all of them, mostly all of them are on some form of anticoagulation. So it is probably conjectural, it's probably anecdotal evidence out here. I think it is probably the anticoagulation to a certain extent which helps. They are on some form of NOACs, long-term NOACs, or on warfarin or acetrom, depending on the kind of pH they are on. Even yesterday we saw a patient of sarcoidosis, so sarcoidosis of the lung. And of course, the patient has some interstitial lung disease, had moderate pH. Of course, these patients are generally making, although she had significant involvement of the lung on the CT scan with a CORAD score of about 17, her oxygen requirement was surprisingly not very high. She was without oxygen, maintaining room air sats of around 94 to 95%. As such, not so ill. So I suspect that as Dr. Navneeta said, that given their kind of respiratory pathology, given the fact that they do not have those kind of receptors, and possibly because of the chronic inflammatory milieu, these patients are probably not as susceptible to COVID as probably the regular garden variety of patients that we normally see. I would suggest day in, day out, like normal adults at 35 to 40 years, they are having a far more worse prognosis with COVID than we have seen with these patients with PH.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very well said. And there are a lot of questions. I think we'll ask one by one these questions. Most of them are pH related, not COVID and pH. Let me see. In pH associated with congenital heart disease, what is your approach and experience? Dr. Navneet, can you hear me?
Yeah. So pulmonary hypertension associated with congenital
heart disease, what is your approach and experience in COVID? These patients, like Eisenmenger, getting COVID, what's your approach?
So, fortunately, I have not had to manage directly, but, as I already mentioned in the talk, it depends on how they present and, whether they are mildly symptomatic, moderately symptomatic, what was their baseline oxygen saturations, is there worsening or dip in the oxygen saturation, how was their baseline hemodynamics, is there any issue with their hemodynamics on presentation. So depending on that, we will have to manage. But the thing is that, they will need more close monitoring. That is the most important thing, because compared to regular patients, changes in their status, unless we pick it up quite early in the course of the disease, it might be difficult to manage. And the other thing is, we have to manage their pH therapy as well. So, in COVID itself, they can have severe illness, systemic inflammatory response, hypotension associated with the COVID disease, and then, adjusting the medication. So all these things will require very close monitoring and following of the hemodynamics and overall situation, and then titration of medicines. And as Dr. Ryan already mentioned, they are already on anticoagulation. That is one of the most beneficial things. most of them will anyway be on anticoagulation. So, that will help as well.
Another question, Dr. Indra, you can answer this, your opinion. Can we start pH-specific therapy in COPD patients?
Yeah, I think if the patient have COPD and they have hypertension, then probably they need therapy as recommended. Only thing then if they have a COVID-19 now,
Yes.
and most of the medicines may have side because any medicines have like phosphodiesterase inhibitor and they have side effects. So if the patient is critically ill or sick, then I think we'll be very flexible in terms of, and at least very careful in terms of having side effect, because in OPD also we see sometimes many patients have side effect. And in terms of phosphodiesterase inhibitor, many patients do not tolerate the recommended dose. Many of them give the half dose. So if there's indications, and then we should give, if the patient is sick and higher the sickness, then we have to have very low threshold of starting the dose and maybe modify the therapy. I think the double-edged thing. So, yeah,
COPD patients suffering from COVID, how do they fare compared to the non-COPD patients? What's your experience?
So I think you would be surprised to know my experience. So don't judge me by my experience because it's anecdotal. So I think most of our COPD patients who are mostly smoker-induced COPD patients are surprisingly doing much better as far as COVID is concerned than to our non-COPD patients. So I'm not saying that smoking has a beneficial effect out here, but definitely for certain reasons, I think probably what Dr. Navneeta said is probably their epitheliums are not, because the chronic inflammation is not picking up the virus maybe to the certain extent as non-COPD patients. But as Dr. Indra said, I think initiating anti-pH therapies in this subgroup is always a double-edged sword because of the fact that these patients are generally likely going to be sick. And in most cases, the pH out here is hopefully going to be reversible. So once the disease settles and once the consolidation is resolved, once the fibrosis resolves, I guess the pH should resolve on its own. So I'm not really sure exactly where to initiate pH therapies in these kind of patients because we do not have guidelines per se. But of course, maybe it's going to be something that's in the form of evolution. So more and more patients of post-COVID we find who's going to come back with shortness of breath and have residual pH. Maybe those will be the kind of patients where we will have to start some form of anti-pH therapies.
Right. So it's a general consensus that COPD patients probably fare better than the non-COPD patients post-COVID.
Probably,
right.
Sir. Yes, sir.
And somebody has asked, this is of course not relevant to this webinar, how to choose between macitentan and ambrisentan. Ayan, can you just address this?
So I guess...
Given patient, how do you choose between the two? Macitentan and ambrisentan.
So I would suggest it this way that it is probably it's not from the of course the mechanism of action is marginally different for the two drugs, but if you look at from the data wise, from the burden of scientific data we have for both of these drugs, unfortunately macitentan is the only drug which actually has a mortality benefit in pulmonary hypertension patients. So if you're looking at giving a patient the chance of reducing mortality, so I would suggest macitentan should be higher up on your choice as far as an anti-pH therapy is concerned. But again, at the same time, I would suggest that ambrisentan is easier to give in our kind of setup, reason being that it is commonly available as fixed dose combinations with some form of PD inhibitors, mostly like sildenafil or tadalafil. So it's easier to give. And the downside of macitentan is generally more expensive compared to ambrisentan. So the choice is basically something that you have to do on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the patient's finances are like, and then also to manage polypharmacy.
Right. So, Dr. Indra, can you take up this question? Can you give Riociguat in other than CTEPH patients? Like chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, we know that it works, but in the other PH patients, can you give this, what's your experience?
I think personally, I have not used this molecule, Riociguat, which are available now. Most of our patients are getting a combination of tadalafil or sildenafil plus an endothelin receptor antagonist.
Okay.
So I think non-thromboembolic, but I think at all they're using. But I have not personal experiences. I think it can cause side effect if phosphodiesterase inhibitors are used. So I think that has to be carefully taken.
So when you combine
partially
with
not
the
used,
PD inhibitors, it may cause side effects, right?
yeah, hypertension.
So Debasri madam, how do you give sildenafil in what dose somebody has asked in children with PH?
So, sir, we generally want to give it in a 3 to 4 divided doses, so 8 hourly to 6 hourly. And the dose we start from 0.5 milligram per kilogram. So that's the starting dose, 0.5 milligram per kilogram per day. And then we can go up to 2 milligram per kilogram per day.
Life expectancy in PH, that's a very difficult question. Life expectancy, pediatric PH group, idiopathic, what will be the life expectancy? Everything done in adult PH, once they start symptom, whatever you do, the most of them, they die within 3 to 5 years. There is always a down. Once the symptom starts, they always take a downhill course, whatever you do. And in pediatric age group, what is your experience or what is the literature says?
Again,
not Eisenmenger. I'm not asking about Eisenmenger.
Yes. Again, idiopathic PAH, they have a better prognosis. Eisenmengers do have a better prognosis compared to idiopathic PAH. Yeah. So idiopathic PAH, if they become symptomatic in the childhood, then generally they don't do well. And we say that if there is syncope, that is generally the last stage. And the people will die in, we can predict with some accuracy that they might die in 6 months to 1 year time, or even less than that. So early presentation is a poor prognostic factor, we can say here.
Dr. Indra, in a critically ill PH patient with COVID-19 infection, what they need to do? How do you manage them? They have to be managed in ICU with whatever COVID protocol and PS specific therapy. Dr. Indra, your take on this?
Yeah, I think if they have critically like pulmonary hypertension, I think the overall you have to treat the patients in clinical scenario. I think in terms of the dependency on ventilations, the type of ventilations, I'm not an expert on ventilation on that note. So the other ancillary therapies, antivirals, all these have to be taken on. So here I think if you are now focusing on other than the other therapy like ventilations on PH alone, then I hear the drugs which are like short acting, if available, which are on parenteral form, which should be used if available. I don't know, I think in our place it's not available. So parenteral form or intravenous infusions or inhalations, those things, because oral tablet may not be a good idea. I mean, this is the commonly used in OPD practice, so that may not be the one should be used. I don't know, I'm not sure it's available everywhere. So that is that logic that I mean in a critically ill patient, if you're giving a therapy like somebody has systemic hypertension, excellent hypertension, or actually we give parenteral antihypertensive agents so that those can be easily titrated. If you give oral drug and patient have hypertension, then it's very difficult to manage. If you give a IV infusion of drugs like NTG or nitroprusside, I'm talking about systemic hypertension, then I think if you can reduce the dose and side effect will be like within few minutes will be gone. So I think that logic will also be in pulmonary hypertension if you're focusing on management of pulmonary hypertension. And
thank you. So it should be managed as any ill patients or any critically ill COVID patients. So PS targeted therapies could have protective effect against COVID-19. This has been discussed. We don't have any data, but probably yes. But the answer is not very certain. This has already been addressed by Dr. Iyer. Any specific drug which helps in complete cure of PH? To my knowledge, there is no drug which completely cures PH. Is there any recommendation regarding initiating monotherapy or dual therapy in PH patients with COVID-19? Ayan, can you say this? To start with, suppose you de novo idiopathic PH patients has come to you. Would you like to start a single drug, or you to start with you will give a combination drug?
So I think so in non-COVID patients, so therapy naive patients with de novo PH or let's say idiopathic PH who comes in, I think the current recommendation is always to start a combination therapy. It is always to have an endothelial receptor antagonist plus a PD5 inhibitor together. I think that always works better rather than going for a monotherapy. But of course, there is no guidelines in COVID patients right now.
The next question, can you answer? Did Selexipag in tablet form helps in PH patients?
So I have no
I have no experience as well.
experience with Selexipag. No idea, sir.
I have no experience as well. Anybody in the panelist who has experience in Selexipag? I don't have any experience.
No, sir, I have not used. Yeah.
You can again answer this question. Which are the best diagnostic tools to rule out PH? It's a very simple, straightforward question. Ayan?
Oh, so I think in COVID patients, simple things would be to look at a 12-lead ECG. As Dr. Indra said, look at your S1Q3T3 patterns, look at sinus tachycardia. These are simple things to rule out pulmonary embolism, especially in the setting of COVID-19. And then, of course, if you really suspect, so most of these patients are generally critically ill on BiPAPs, NIV is difficult to mobilize, getting a CTPA is not always easy. So, but having at least a bedside echocardiogram is always easy. So look at the RARBs, look whether the RARB is dilated. You can always look at the pulmonary arteries on the echo. If you get a good echo window, see whether there is any major thrombus, saddle thrombus in the main pulmonary arteries. So these are simple things to look at. And apart from that, you could do a D-dimer level, but in COVID patients, D-dimers are generally high. So it is very, very non-specific and not really suggestive of PE in these kind of patients. So the general dictum in what we follow is if you are looking at S1Q3T3, if you are looking at sinus tachycardia, RARB is dilated, if the patient's hypotension, most likely it would suggest a massive pulmonary embolism. And then, of course, I think we know how to treat that beyond that.
So his question was anyway, if that is true, but what is the best diagnostic tool? In that case, it is a CT pulmonary angio, which will say that it's a pulmonary embolism, and that clinches the diagnosis. Right?
Absolutely.
Then, what is the current consensus about long-term or short-term anticoagulation following severe or moderate COVID-related lung injury? What parameters to follow? I think you have discussed this. You can just repeat that. How do you decide about anticoagulation post-COVID, whether moderate or severe?
So generally, we've been off. I mean, there has been an evolution as to how we manage anticoagulation in COVID patients. So initially, we were going by a ferritin levels as well as D-dimers sometimes. And if your ferritins were really on the higher side, we generally were looking at starting these patients. If you're looking at oral, we were looking at the NOACs. If the patient is hospitalized, we were giving them either heparins or low molecular weight heparins. So, the general dictum right now is as long as these patients are requiring oxygen therapy, which means their saturations are less than 94% and mostly bedridden or are on prone ventilation, these kind of patients are generally benefiting from therapeutic anticoagulation. That is 1 milligram per kg body weight of LMWH twice daily. Of course, if these patients are not so sick enough but are still requiring oxygen and are at home, you can probably think of giving one of the NOACs. In that case, it could be either apixaban 2.5 or 5 milligrams twice daily or rivaroxaban 10 milligrams once daily.
Right. So there is no specific guideline yet about continuing oral anticoagulation as you have told NOACs, either apixaban or rivaroxaban. But by and large, if the patient has other comorbids, somebody is obese, somebody has other comorbids and its ferritin and D-dimers are high, these are the candidates who probably can have a pulmonary embolism in the post-COVID follow-up, and you can give these drugs for a period of 4 to 6 weeks depending on individual patients. There is no specific recommendation or guideline so far, but it's an off-label indication to start anticoagulation.
Right.
You have any comment, Indra?
Yeah, as a doctor had said, as D-dimer is non-specific, will be always elected in severe cases. So if it's severely it is all generally individual and personalized. But if D-dimer is very high, like more than 3 to 5 times of upper limit of normal, and if there is no clinical thrombotic event like DVT or pulmonary embolisms, normally in general, in real life practice, we have seen people using NOAC. There's no recommended dose. Some are using full dose, some are giving half dose. As a cardiologist, now we have started using patients who are not very confident about the indications, then we are using rivaroxaban 2.5 twice daily. So I think if D-dimer is very high, maybe 3 to 5 times the upper limit of normal, even there's no thrombosis or thrombotic event, the NOAC have been used. I mean, low dose or half dose, and how long I think is on order of personal choice, few weeks.
4 to 6 weeks, as sir said. I think generally that's.
That's true. There are some other questions which are not related to COVID and pH. They are all general questions. I'll just end with two of my recent experiences with post-COVID thrombosis, because you have to have a high index of suspicion. One is a young 35-year-old girl. She is mildly obese, not very obese, and she recovered. She was hospitalized. She was a moderate symptomatic. Her CT 4-hour score was around 11 to 12. Her recovery was uneventful. She didn't require ventilation. She was on low oxygen for some time. Post-discharge uneventful, was doing well. About 4 weeks after, she suddenly fainted in the bathroom early morning 5 o'clock, and her father-in-law gave me a ring, sir, my daughter-in-law has fainted. Her saturation is 50%. I asked them to take her to the nearest hospital, and the cardiologist was there. He took an ECG, as you have told. He has a tachycardia. He had a acute S1, S2, S3 pattern, and her saturation was low. He was put on oxygen, and then PROPT was high. And then they did an echo. Echo showed that RA and RB are dilated. And we did a CT angio very quickly, and it confirmed the diagnosis of a submassive pulmonary embolism. We put a catheter into the pulmonary artery, and we did a catheter-based thrombolysis, and the result was excellent. That is, she recovered and she's doing well. This is one patient. The second patient was very surprising. There were so many cardiologists, not the pediatric, the other cardiologists. One lady, she has a mitral prosthetic valve. Her INR was always stable. It was not a case of labile INR. Perfectly well, very well educated lady, around 50. She had COVID. Post-COVID, she recovered well. She came for a checkup. The INR that day was 2.8. Then she told, I am only feeling extremely weak. Otherwise, her saturation was normal. Heart rate was normal. All the vitals were normal. Prosthetic valve sounds were normal. I did a echo. Prosthetic valve function was normal, and the LV function was normal as well. Lo and behold, 2 weeks after that, she got admitted to one of the corporate hospitals where the chief cardiologist is my student. He gave me a ring and told that, sir, this lady has been admitted with a prosthetic valve thrombosis, and today the INR is 2.7 also. And you have seen her 15 days ago. The echo shows that RA and RB are dilated. So the LV is dilated, there is a LV dysfunction, there is a RB dysfunction as well. Then I told, go ahead and thrombolize her. Then she was thrombolized and she recovered well. So these kind of patients, see, you have to have a high index of suspicion. Post-COVID, our experience is not long. We do not know what is going to happen, even in the pediatric as well as the adult case group. Unless you have a high index of suspicion, you would miss such cases of thromboembolism. And as has been rightly pointed out by Dr. Navneet and Dr. Indra, we do not know these patients who have, especially moderate to severe lung involvement and who have recovered. We have to follow them up and see how often they develop pulmonary arterial hypertension, because the subset is to develop pulmonary hypertension. How much of them, the lung parenchyma completely recovers? How much of them have a residual damage? This we still do not know. We have to, maybe 6 months down the line, we'll be able to know the data, world data, or our own data. So we have so many patients by this time. So if there is any other question or any other comments from the panelists or from the audience, we'll be happy to take up, because we are already 17 minutes post our scheduled time. So any other question or any other comments from the speakers and the panelists?
Nothing, sir, as of now.
Only I want to online, like, yes,
if there are no other questions,
I think Dr. Indra has something.
Please, Dr. Indra.
So,
Please.
many of like patients who have no COVID, maybe mild or asymptomatic, they come with dyspnea and similar symptoms, and we fail to find any positive any pathology, like they do not have any arrhythmia, no hypertension, cardiac function is normal, echocardiography. Now I'm thinking, why not pulmonary? Because we do not know the prospective, we do not know. So if they have significant dyspnea, not functional, and we do not find a possible cause, then probably pulmonary hypertension is one thing to be considered always, because probably we do not know how many of them, what the percentage will develop. I think that is one thing I have learned probably from today's discussion.
But in that case, you have to closely follow up those patients and find out evidence of pulmonary hypertension. Unless you have objectively established a diagnosis of PH, you can't give a PH-specific therapy, right?
Yeah.
You can give bronchodilators or inhalers like that, but we can't give a PH-specific therapy unless we prove it by echo or whatever means that it is.
Yes, sir. What I'm saying, sir, many times we fail to find a possible, any causative etiology, like why he or she is having dyspnea even after they have recovered. COVID was mild and significant dyspnea. Many of our professional colleagues we have seen, they have significant dyspnea, and we fail to find a cause. So I think those kind of patients should be evaluated. I think at least prospectively evaluated if some of them develop or doesn't develop pulmonary hypertension.
But as you said, most of their echoes are normal. Their RARVs are generally normal. Their TR gradients are also not so high. So even we've been following up these kind of patients, and it's really been very difficult to ascertain a cause for their dyspnea. Like you said, dyspnea, the next common problem that we've seen in post-COVID patients is heart rate fluctuations. They have these non-specific tachycardias. They are very easily fatigued, even with it's like NYHA class 3-4 almost for almost 2 to 3 months. And most of the young patients, they generally tend to recover on their own, maybe 2-3 months later. But generally the older patients with a little more comorbids are taking even longer to recover.
No, what I'm saying, like many times, because you are PH specific doing a clinic, but many times in general for us, focus is more on the left side. Even during echocardiography, but PH may not be in your radar. You'll be thinking more of LV dysfunction. You will not be really focusing on PH. That is, I think, the common, those who are not especially focused on pulmonary hypertension.
Right.
No, we can iron because he is doing a PH clinic. I think you can this will be a very good data. These kind of patients where there is no pulmonary fibrosis, pulmonary function is normal, echo is apparently normal, they are symptomatic. To follow up them and see how much of them truly completely recover and how much of them truly develop a sort of PH or not.
So we are in the process of getting data, so hopefully we'll be able to compile it by the end of this year.
Okay, if there are no further questions and comments, I thank all the speakers and panelists for doing an excellent job. I think all the participants must have been educated from this webinar. Now I hand over the session to Nitin for a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And first of all, my sincere thanks for Professor H.L. Misra, sir, for sparing your valuable time. And at the same time, I would like to say, sir, that I would like to thank you for sparing your time, because this particular subject is a subject which is not that way very well taken care from all the clinicians, sir, because it's that rare disease also, sir. So having your kind words on this particular subject, that is a very valuable thing, and making our efforts also meaningful in this regard. I would like to thank Dr. Indra Kuladipati and Dr. Navneeta Shashikumar for their excellent presentation on this PH, both the aspects of the PH. And at the same time, I would like to thank you very much for Dr. Ayankar and Dr. Devashri for sharing your personal experience for all these PH patients. Maybe these patients were not very well correlated with the COVID, which was our main topic. Just to share with all of you, sir, that looking forward for your exclusive patronage on the world-class international quality brands which we have got in the field of PH, that is Pulmonext, PH20, Macetant, Ryoshi. We have got all the basket products with PH, and at the same time we have got some therapy related to COVID patient also, that is Fabilo, our Fabipira brand, and Tofacitinib also we have came, that is our brand is there. And just to share with all of you, sir, that we may be a young player, but our drive and enthusiasm are the best in associating with all of you. And Thank you very much for joining for this important session with the pH aspect, sir. Thank you very much.
Nitin, before we close,
Yeah.
I would request you on behalf of MSN, why don't you go for a registry for our pH? Because in India we have registries for heart failure, for hypertension, for diabetes, for coronary artery disease getting started. So pH, there is no registry. There is no pH specific treatment or pH therapy centers. Only I'm very happy that he is doing it, because most of the cardiologists who is passing out DM is only interested in interventional cardiology.
Sir, in this
There is no other interest as far as the new generation of cardiologists are concerned. So why don't you take an initiative and do a registry, put some important corporate or government hospitals and put a registry on pH, and we can have many data how much during COVID period, post-COVID, de novo pH. I think that would be a very good registry data.
Sure, sir.
And what do you say?
In fact, sir, in this contest, we have already started.
Totally
our work.
agree, sir. I totally agree, sir. So it is something that is really wanted. It's an unmet need currently in pulmonary hypertension. We need more data from our own country.
Sir, we have already started our work in this contest, what you are sharing, sir. We are in the discussion with Dr. S. Ramakrishna at AIMS and Dr. Rahul Mehrotra at the Max Delhi, sir, who is mainly taking care of these PH patients. In North Zone, we have started some efforts, sir. I would really require your help if we can do something in the East Zone. Dr. Ayankar and Dr. Mishra, sir, I will personally come to you, and if we can do something in the East Zone in this perspective, I will be really requiring your help in this.
Okay, so do you please. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.